So on the news this week, we have even more allegations of Andrew Cuomo's sexual harassment, sexual misconduct while he was governor of New York. I thought I would mention some other subtle forms of harassment at the workplace that I've run into, and a few things that really should be off limits at work or protected at work, if you will, and how it parallels sexual harassment in many ways. And unfortunately, a lot of people will silently deal with these things alone. And when we could have a more positive working environment if people recognize that not everybody enjoys life differently, and just because somebody lives their life differently doesn't make them less of a worker. Now, number one, dietary preferences. Oh my God. Try going to a workplace event and try saying no to food, or try bringing your own food to the office, and just give it a try. I hate to say too much here. Now, here's the thing. I personally think dietary preference should be a protected characteristic. Now, the rebuttal I'll get is, well, it kind of is, right? Because it borders on, depending on why you're refusing the food, it's already protected. Well, I beg to differ there. If you say no to a food, you shouldn't have to defend why you are saying no, right? Can you imagine if your boss or your coworker makes a sexual advance and you say no? In a civilized world, that should be the end of the discussion, right? You shouldn't have to defend yourself on why, right? Along the same lines, I think once somebody says no, that should be the end of the story. I really do. And unfortunately, a lot of times you have to defend yourself, which opens up a whole can of worms, right? I was at a job interview one time. I was interviewing for a tutoring agency, and I made the mistake of the interviewer had invited me out to a meal. I should have known that was a problem, but I went along with it because I don't want to rock the boat. And I'm asking the waiter about various ingredients, and the interviewer asked me, because this is a tutoring agency, so we got to go to the student's home, asked me if that would be a problem if I went to a student's home and they had food, and they offered me food. And I answered, I've lived with these conditions for 20 plus years. I don't think it would be a problem, right? I navigate going to people's homes all the time. Long story short, I didn't get hired, and I think that was a big reason, because he mentioned that he worried if I would be a liability. I think that's the word he used while we were talking. But he emailed me saying that I was overqualified or something. He was smart not to email me the real reason he didn't hire me. But that's what I mean about dietary preferences. It should be a protected characteristic, right? In a perfect world, nobody should have to conduct a job interview while eating, right? Because that opens a whole can of worms to what they can and can't eat. And I don't know. At least there got to be a cleaner way of doing that. Right? There got to be a cleaner way of saying I prefer not to go to a meal for my job interview, right? I'll let you guys brainstorm how that could be handled. Okay, dietary preference ought to be protected. Now, depending on what state you live in, there's a lot of discussion this past, 10 or so years about marriage equality. There's never any discussion about singles equality, which is kind of odd, right? When I see the acronym LGBTQ, I always add an S to the end. Or sometimes when I talk about being single, I call it being solosexual, because that's how I feel about it. But a lot of times, as a single guy, okay, as a single guy, I do have more availability in certain regards, right? What I don't like is how being single comes with its own drawbacks, right? But nobody ever acknowledges it. So, for example, I might be available on a Saturday night when nobody wants to attend to an emergency. Okay, but sometimes on a Tuesday night, I don't have a wife at home to prepare food for me, and I just want to go home on time at 5 p.m. in order to take care of that. Or you get the idea, right? Why don't we integrated together at work, right? Singles have their drawbacks. Couples with children have their drawbacks. We should. Why does the help only go in one direction? That's my big problem with it. Okay, so dietary preferences, without having to disclose why you have those preferences, right? I know the reason why people have those preferences often borders on other protected characteristics, but I want dietary preferences to be its own protective characteristic. And being single. Number 3, your personal lifestyle outside of the office. Now, what do I mean by that? I work with a number of other people who have very different interests than I do. And when I request vacation time, it always gets on the back burner. My coworkers, they can all relate to each other's vacations. I recharge very differently. I hate to go into detail in this video because I want it to be short. And often, people just don't see it in the same light. I love to go stargazing. And there's a favorite vantage point of mine that's about a 2.5-hour drive away. And oftentimes, there might be a lunar eclipse at 3-4 in the morning, and I gotta race back to go to work at 9 a.m. And I can't tell you how many times I've made that drive. It's in Vantage, Washington, back to Seattle, and completely didn't know how I managed to make it to Seattle. I'm very lucky that nothing has ever happened when I've done that. And then my coworkers, they schedule something off, and sometimes they don't even give much warning about taking time off, right? Their kids have certain events. Everybody seems to just accept that, right? If I tell them I have a lunar eclipse like a year from now, even I have trouble scheduling that, right? And so I think your personal lifestyle outside of the office ought to be a protected characteristic. I really love, when I was working at a startup a couple years ago, how we requested our vacation. It was very anonymous, right? You just mentioned a certain day off. I mean, it wasn't anonymous, but you entered it onto a computer, and it was either approved or denied, and most of the time it was approved. Nobody ever sat down face-to-face. Where I'm working at right now, the teams are very small and sometimes too personal. That's another problem of mine, getting too personal with the people that I work with. Okay, number 4, if you live in a state or a city where marijuana is legal, I think your use of it ought to be protected. I mean, think about all the things that people consume into their body that is much more dangerous, right? I'd rather see somebody use marijuana to solve their health problems than to take prescription drugs, right? And for some reason, it drives me nuts when I see somebody get in trouble. Right here, where I live in Seattle, it's legal. In Phoenix, it might not be legal, but it's kind of pseudo-legal. But sometimes people get caught up in various. I was just watching. I hate to mention the case, but I was watching about this kid who got tangled up in some legal trouble, and he violated probation by smoking marijuana. And there are worse things in the world, I would imagine. Number 5, vaccination status. So right now I'm recording this in early August, and apparently the idea is that the people who are vaccinated can still catch the virus. They won't get sick, and they can still spread the virus. Well, if that's the case, then if you're worried about the unvaccinated, why don't you get vaccinated then, right? And certainly I can understand people asking me to respect some social distancing at the office, but how about all the, you go outside and there's animals around, right? Does every animal you run into get a vaccine, right? Certainly a bat could fly into your home, right? Do you worry about that as well? We're human. We're supposed to be in contact with other life forms, right? Anyways, I get routinely harassed over these differences in life. And certainly I understand that sexual harassment is a very difficult topic, but living life feeling like you're constantly climbing an uphill slope because of these differences in the workplace can really wear down on you. Anyways, feel free to leave a comment if you've ever run into any of these harassment issues or maybe some other ones that I haven't mentioned on this video.